Lime Interactive is a leader in user and consumer research, and I manage our sales and marketing team here. We've noticed that as of late, we've seen a rapid increase in the demand for persona work, and it got us thinking a little bit more deeply about why this might be happening. What are the drivers in the market? Why are these conversations, sudden for new development of personas in 2014? And as we started to engage in those conversations with some of our clients, we realized that they had a lot to say about it, and so we wanted to bring this conversation to you. So that's where this webinar was born. Our first panelist today is Sally Cohen. Sally is from Coca-Cola. She's the Director of User Experience there. She's got several decades of user experience under her belt, managing strategy and also getting down into the field and tracking usability testing on her own. Sally's worked to establish user-centered methods and practices and developing the core in her company's process. Currently, Sally is developing personas as we speak for 2014 and beyond, and formerly she worked at HSI where she developed personas for a variety of different industries. Usability testing in-house like Sally, and she's worked to establish user-centered methods and practices so that they become part of her company's core process. Carol's relevant experience is quite similar. She's designed and managed personas for the online auto shopping sites, and she's actively using them, the ones that she's designed on her own for the past 5 years. Our third panelist is Jerry Steele. Jerry's from Integrated DNA Technologies, and there manages their marketing team. Jerry has a wealth of user experience that he brings to the table too, and his passion for making sure that he's clear on combining tools, needs, goals, and aligning them with business goals has made him a success there. Bringing that common vision together is really, that multidisciplinary common vision is what Jerry excels at. His relevant experience to personas is critical for this conversation. He's been a UX manager at ACT, where he performed persona research then, and he also leads cross-functional lean persona workshops for IDT. We also have Lime Interactive Anya Rodriguez on the line. Anya is our founder and CEO. She also has a wealth of experience that she's bringing to the table, and she excels in managing behavioral personas for our clients and making sure that they're customized for each particular project. So Anya will be joining the conversation with the others today. So with that, I think we're going to get started right into our first theme, which is definition about personas and a discussion about how they're built. So Anya, I think this is a great place for you to get started.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Anya Rodriguez, and I'm happy to be here today to chat with you about personas and what we're seeing in the industry as far as development and changes moving along. One that we have is from our friends in Finland, and as you see there, for those that are from Finland, this is from our friends at Klievents. They put another typical, stereotypical variant. We have a good-looking cowboy here to add to the fun. Okay, so now let's just go ahead and move forward and just, talk about the differentiation of how folks might define personas and what their value is. I'd like to just chat briefly and talk about the differentiation about related to consumer segmentation as well as personas. And the way I like to define those differences is really in how those two come about. I'm going to ask our panelists to tell me about their experiences of, how teams at their corporations have handled the differences between bringing the marketing team, their experience team into of creating these personas, and how they may piggyback from one another in that creation. At Lime Interactive, we think of personas to be complementary. Typically, we have seen areas where the marketing team has done their own consumer segmentation, and then the UX team might add to it and really talk through the factors that ads really help them create designs and drive those designs through it. And I'll show you an example in a moment. I've also seen variances where we do the opposite, right? So the UX team does qualitative research, then they do some quantitative research, and they create personas that really have what I like to call, which is on the next slide, you know, really kind of drive some additional information such as, you know, features that this type of user would like to use, design implication considerations, what those opportunities for success may be. And when I see them typically from consumer segmentation perspective, I might get other types of information and might be answering other types of questions such as what is a typical life in a data type of user, where they like to shop, you know, they like to go to Gucci, they like to spend a certain amount. If I was creating, let's say, one first day Starbucks, I might have a persona that might be more, you know, fluent, and if I was doing maybe consumer segmentation, I might say, well, this person likes to shop at Gucci, she likes her latte, she begins her day by doing a spinning class, and I talk to her life, like related to her life goals. If I was doing it from a user experience perspective, and this is how it differentiates, I might say, hey, this persona, she prefers one-click checkout. She currently is using Google Wallet, and talk about features that are important to this type of user from a design implication perspective. With that said, I'm going to take a moment and ask my panelists, and I'll start with Carol. Carol, can you maybe help us in kind of differentiating how you've seen marketing teams work with UX teams and differentiating segmentation to personas?
Sure. Hi, Anya. Thanks for asking. Yeah, at Edmunds, I can talk about what we've done here. We initially started with personas that we created through qualitative research just to get our hands around who our customers could be based on the kind of whole body of auto shoppers, people who are using third-party auto sites. And we then ran a segmentation study because the marketing team as well as the product team wanted to understand better who are the targets, the segments that we should really be targeting. And you know, then what we did was go back and do additional qualitative research to round out the personas so that they were able to be used in conjunction with the segments. It seemed like it might be confusing for everybody to have segments and personas that weren't really matched. So we really found a way to make the two complementary and have been using those for a couple of years.
Thank you, Carol. So, Sally, yesterday when we were talking, we talked a little bit about, and I'd love for you to share here with the greater team, about how you differentiate the questions that you may need if you are looking to answer, you know, whether consumer segmentation is the first approach or personas is the first approach, and how they differentiate and complement each other.
Yeah, Anya, thanks. You know, I think this is one of the areas where people get a little confused between what does marketing do and what does user experience do. And I like to differentiate it in terms of the types of questions that we each are able to answer, right? So, you know, from a marketing standpoint, we're really trying to figure out who's the target audience to sell goods or services to. And from a design standpoint, we're really thinking about how do we effectively enable somebody to use a solution. So it's a slightly different spin on the same notion of who is our audience, but the type of information that we put into each of those is intended to address a very different set of questions. So, you know, I always think about it like, you know, knowing somebody's life goals, like I like to, you know, shop at exclusive places. doesn't necessarily tell me how somebody's going to navigate, or whether, you know, they prefer to search versus browse, or whether they think the navigation should be task-based versus topical-based, right? We need a different level of information and understanding about user behavior when we're designing that is slightly different than what marketing needs in their approach. And I think Carol's point is really good in terms of the fact that it makes sense for them to be complementary, because it can be confusing if you're segmenting your audience differently. But I think the content is inherently different based on the goals of what you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you, Sally. Jerry, I'm going to throw this now to you, because I know that you originally were a lot more involved in the UX side. You're a director of marketing. You may have a different perspective. What's your take on how these two differentiate? Or
I actually really agree with a lot of things that people have said. So yeah, I sort of evolved into the director of marketing from the UX manager at the company I'm at now. And I agree. It's really about what are the questions that you're trying to answer, what's important for the particular task at hand. You know, in our marketing roles, we're looking at our product mix and how we're approaching different segments of the market. Things that are important might be like job title, or, you know, some of the more traditional kind of market segment kind of stuff. You know, how much money are they spending? How big, you know, how big is the opportunity there? And that's an important way to segment audiences there. But at least in our particular realm, that's not a great way to design software. You know, a lot of the market segments, when it comes down to interacting with our websites or placing an order, you know, those market segments don't really make as much of a difference. It's much more about what the information needs. And so those information needs tend to be captured more in the persona type work. And whereas, you know, the sort of market direction kinds of questions get answered in the more traditional marketing segmentation type work.
Okay. Thanks. I have a question. Do you see, and anyone can go ahead and I guess maybe, Carol, let's go back to you. Do you see, which one comes first, consumer segmentation or persona building?
I think the answer to a lot of these questions is it depends. And we kind of debated that here. Should we start with a segmentation and then build personas? Ultimately, what we decided to do is start with personas to give the challenge team, and when I say challenge teams, I mean cross-functional teams that consist of product, design, and developers. We wanted to give them something they could work with in making everyday decisions about designs and products and features. And so it was just more cost-effective and faster to create personas for them to use. Then the marketing team decided, you know, they really wanted to have these segments to be able to target. And then, like I said, you know, we went back and identified personas that the challenge teams could use that were aligned with the segment. So I think it just depends on resources, time, who needs them first. You know, does the marketing team need to start working on it before the product designers, whatever. I think also here, when we started this effort, there really wasn't any kind of organized fashion to understand the bigger body of shoppers, auto shoppers, and so we could have started anywhere. You know, I think if you're starting at a company where there's already a huge marketing function in place, then maybe they've already got a segmentation. I think it just depends on the environment.
That brings me now back to Sally, since she's Coca-Cola is a large organization. Sally, if you don't mind sharing your take on, you know, what comes first and why, or how does it, what's your take on how you begin?
Yeah, I think like Carol, you have to give the typical response that we all give in our field, which is it depends, because there is no one right way, right? And I would also add to that, in some cases, maybe both aren't really necessary. So you know, to me, there's a difference potentially in the types of work that you do as to whether or not market segmentation even makes sense. So, for example, I work on a lot of internal applications, right, for Coca-Cola associates to use. And you know, it's not necessarily about there's a market segment that we're trying to penetrate. It's about who are our employees and what are they trying to accomplish in their jobs and how do we enable that with technology, right? And in that case, I find doing behavioral personas to be absolutely essential, but I think if you try to segment people, like, you know, we have obviously a huge employee population, but talking about them in terms of, you know, typical demographics, it tells us a little bit, but it certainly doesn't tell us very much about how we develop solutions to enable their productivity. And so we don't focus as much when we're talking internally about market segmentation. And we probably segment insofar as defining user groups, right? So we use some standard demographic information, I guess, to determine what's in a group, but that's with the goal of conducting the qualitative research to ultimately deliver a set of personas.
Beautiful. Jerry, anything to add to this, or should we move to the next question?
All I would add is that I find it's not, for me, it's not really a question of which comes first. It's really, you know, sort of yes and. They all kind of have to, you know, the market pressure is on to move pretty quickly. And so you really kind of want to get to what is this product or what is this interaction as fast as possible. And you kind of want to reach into the toolbox for whichever one fits better. Now, I find the personas tend to work really well as sort of boundary objects between people in this, you know, as, you know, someone said that the challenge groups, these cross-functional groups, you know, people can kind of get their heads around personas in a way that helps them do their work better and helps to define the product or the interface better than I think market segmentation sometimes.
Okay. I'm gonna keep asking another question here, Jerry. So we recognize that the methods for defining personas and doing personas, especially when you're doing lean personas, can you comment? So we recognize there's different methods, and can you comment a little bit about maybe your experiences creating maybe a lean persona versus one that might have statistical significance, and what you think about that and where you stand on that part of the question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can talk about the difference between accuracy and precision, right? You can spend lots of time and come up with a persona that really, really, you know, reflects your customer base. You know, you can take your time, do your ethnographic interviews, go out on ride-alongs with people or whatever, you know, to spend a day in their life, you know, and really work really hard to make the personas really, really accurate. Sometimes that's not necessarily important that they be completely accurate. You know, a lot of times if you're working on a project with customers you know fairly well, you can make some assumptions, and you can get your team together to create personas that are, you know, at least precise. We all agree that this is the same kind of person that we're trying to solve a problem for. And sometimes that that agreement, that consensus is enough, right, to help you decide which tasks you're going to take on and which features you can leave out of the system for now. And so sometimes it's just getting people in the room and say, okay, who are we going to be talking about today? When we talk about the user, what do we mean by that? And making sure that everyone's looking at the same version of the user with the same emphasis and the same needs. And so some of the work that we've done at IDT is just quickly, let's get people into a room. Let's decide what this user is today, how we think about them today, and then let's prioritize some features around that. Then the UX team can run away and validate that that persona and say, oh, well, you know, this thing that we thought, turns out we were a little bit wrong on that. Or this thing we're way wrong on that. So it's sort of a guess and measure check kind of lean approach to doing the personas, rather than sort of the big upfront research and then a presentation.
Great, thank you, Jerry. Sally, what's your take on whether you go through the long, statistical significant findings or create personas and iterate them and get them based on various iterations of it?
Yeah, I think, I don't think of it as either or, but it's more of a continuum of how much time and effort and money do you spend to get it exactly right, when I don't think there is an exactly right. You know, in any sort of user research kind of activity, we're not trying to get to the 100%, right? It's really about identifying that 80%. What are the norms within a particular set of users, and what are typical behaviors? Because ideally, if you're using these folks as targets for your design, you're trying to design for that majority and not necessarily for that small minority. So, you know, for me, you know, I always try to say that we're not going for statistical significance. We're trying to get the gist, you know, the general nature of a particular type of end user and what's critical about their needs and their behaviors that we need to identify. I think, like all methods that we do in this space, the iteration that Jerry described makes perfect sense, right? You're never, you know, I think everybody comes into research, whether they want to or not, with hypotheses, and particularly if you're working inside a company, you already know something about the end users you're designing for. And, you know, and you can start the iteration without necessarily having done any research up front. You know, I think back to when, you know, Alan Cooper popularized this whole idea of personas, right? He actually did it, as I recall, initially without any user research. He was doing it for sort of a replacement of doing research, right? We still need to know who we're designing for, but if you don't have the opportunity to go out and talk to the folks, then how do we all agree on who the target is, right? So, you know, so I'm sort of reminded of that, you know, you don't have to do the user research to define a persona, but that research helps get levels of fidelity, I think, and sort of goodness in your personas that you may not have otherwise had. But I do think there's, you know, point of diminishing returns if you do so much research. One, your project becomes way too expensive and it takes too much time, and people will think, oh, it's just another reason not to do research, right? So you have to sort of balance that need for preciseness and dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's with how much is good enough.
Great. Thank you so much. Carol, anything else to add here that we're covered so far?
We have a few questions, actually, guys, since we're on this topic. This is Jennifer. We've got some questions related to the discussion on the lean process, handing it over from one department to another, and some commentary around statistical significance, these couple keywords that just came up in the last three folks. And they are, the audience, a couple of different people are asking about harmonizing different departments and general approach on making sure from an internal perspective that all different business silos can use these personas effectively. I think this might be a nice time to touch on that.
Fantastic. Carol, since you've had your personas in place for about 5 years, do you want to touch on how it's worked within Edmunds and Edmunds Heaven, Persona Heaven, as you'd like to call it?
Persona Heaven, yeah. Yes. I think, first of all, I just want to clarify, we've had these personas for about 2 years, and I heard a couple of different questions in there. I think one is, you know, the different silos, getting them to work together. To me, that has a lot to do with the way that the personas are created. And one of the reasons that I've used the term Persona Heaven is that I feel like we really, from the beginning, made a conscious effort to make sure that when we did the qualitative portion of this, when we did a bunch of interviews, that everybody was involved. I mean, we literally had like 30 people involved, which at the time that we started the project, some people said, you're crazy to try to wrangle that many people. But what we found was that, for example, when we did the interviews, if it was like either myself or another researcher with either a product person or a designer or a developer along on the interview, people had ownership. And when we went back and when we got all together and, you know, tried to coalesce all of these interviews into trends and eventually create personas from that, people could say with confidence, oh, you know, Joe in, you know, Glendale, I remember him, he was the guy that blah, 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 and feel like they really owned the personas because they owned some of the research that went along with it. So my experience has been that the best way to get people to really embrace the personas and, you know, from the start is to get them involved in the process of making them. Even when we had the segmentation study done, you know, we worked pretty closely with the research team that ran that and worked with them to create the personas that came out of, you know, to align with those segments so people had more ownership. I think another way to do that, and frankly a way that we've kind of been challenged a little bit with, is to not only train people on what personas are and how to use them, which we've done, but to help to actually sit with the teams who are using them and really try to help them understand how they can take the information that we get from the personas, turn that into scenarios that, you know, describe the kinds of things that that persona might want to do, and then go from there into design. I think for us, the scenario piece wasn't quite as strong as we had wanted it, and but people really embraced the personas and used them, you know, quite extensively, and, you know, are still talking about them now in their everyday kind of product and design decisions.
Beautiful. Great. Jerry, do you want to go ahead and add to that a little bit? What your take on harmonizing internally the persona process so that you have internal buy-in and you can maybe draw on either this experience or your days of ACT or IBM, whatever's best for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that getting everyone involved in designing them is really, really critical. I think it was Jared Spool that, you know, if you search, he's got a slide that says, you know, persona is not the piece of paper, you know, that you hand out at the end of the thing. It's not the poster you put on the wall. It's the shared understanding of who this customer is and what their information needs are, what their life goals are, so that you can design around that. And once everyone kind of shares that thing, that you know, have that shared external understanding of it, I think that's really when you see the power of it. You know you're doing really well when people come back to you, you know, a few months later talking about, you know, your persona by name, you know, or you're in a meeting and someone else says, well, I don't think Ben would do this, and then you know you've kind of won. I think also I'd like to echo Carol's, you know, that the persona plus the scenario is a really important progression to lead people through, leading people from, okay, this is who our user is, right? We all agree on that, okay, and we do some, you know, a workshop, half day, you know, couple hours around asking questions. What is who is this person? What are their goals in life? What are their needs? If you search, I think Jeff Patton has a great little example online on pragmatic personas, you know, a quick hour and a half sort of workshop you can lead people through to define that persona. And then you go, okay, well, what are the scenarios that this person cares about, right? What are the scenarios? What's the customer journey that he's got to go through? And leading people through that just really standard UX progression, I think it again helps people, the entire team, take ownership of the process, and that's what the goal is.
Beautiful. Okay, Sally, anything else to add here before we move on?
No, I think they covered that territory very well.
Beautiful. So let's now move on and talk a little bit about words of wisdom. Before I do that, Jen, is there any other topic that we may have missed in that point with the sort of questions that are coming in? Okay,
I think we're good. You know, we have a handful of questions that are coming in that people are actually answering, so I think our audience is thinking along the same lines that we are.
Great, thank you so much. So now let's go ahead and move on to sort of the words of wisdom, pitfalls, success points, painful points, whatever you want to call it, and talk about things that if you were just about to start a project with personas that you want to think about and make sure that you integrate into, or, you know, kind of plan it when you are, you know, starting this huge endeavor to create personas, whether it's large or small, and doing lean, regardless of which one you do, really how to get buy-in, how to really any kind of observational or needs and sample size, et cetera. I'd like to start off and maybe just share some of what we have seen with sort of as a third-party consulting firm and how we've seen various of our clients kind of have a little bit of a stumbling block in some of these areas. It goes along with what Carol and Jerry talked a little bit about in creating buy-in, et cetera. One of the things that we'd like to make sure that our clients make sure they understand is you need, as you engage in starting your persona project, we typically start off and we create a stakeholder mapping. So if let's say we were doing one for Edmunds, we'd start and we'd create every touch point, any type of customer that might be a stakeholder in a persona. That may be an auto insurance company, it may be the Department of Transportation, it could be obviously the customer, it could be a third-party auto site, auto manufacturers. There's a number of folks, and the reason why you want to do, the reason why we typically start the exercise there is that by doing that exercise with maybe your initial team, you can identify all the touch points, and you want to make sure that when you're trying to get buy-in, you diversify, and you make sure you try to integrate some of these touch points, if not all, if possible, because that will help you create a little bit of what Carol talked about and Jerry talked about and Sally is currently doing, is ensuring that you have what I'd like to call at least the 50%, 51% rule, which at least you need more than 50% of folks to really embrace these personas. And by diversifying, you basically are creating different avenues for you to do so. If you don't mind, Sally, maybe you start with your words of wisdom or pitfalls or success points where you think for those that might be starting that it might be helpful to know.
Yeah, this is a fun topic because I think you know, where Carol's been in persona heaven, I've probably experienced the good, the bad, the ugly in terms of everything that you can in the persona space. So there are a few things that I would point out. I think one of the most, I mean, you mentioned sort of mapping the stakeholders. I think the first key decision that you make is if you are going to do the user research, what are the user groups that you're identifying? And I think that's a key decision because it determines in part how many people you go talk to and what the intention is that they're to represent. And getting buy-in, you know, as everyone talked about, the buy-in from your audience, that these are sort of the representative populations is really a good place to start. And it's about also trying not to split hairs and say, all right, we have 15 different user groups, but we also don't have one either. There are nuances that we need to discover. And that the determining of your user groups doesn't necessarily determine how many personas you ultimately end up with, because you might find out when you do the research that within a user group there may be more than one necessary persona. So it's not necessarily about saying that up front, but it is really a helpful sort of launching point both for the buy-in and for the exercise of gathering data. So, and I find that sometimes is a really hard decision for people to make, is how do you define what a user group is. So that's kind of one, I think, really key, not gotcha, but something to bear in mind when you're doing this sort of exercise. And the other one is my favorite funny story. I shared it with my fellow panelists earlier on. In my former life, when I was a consultant, I had a client who had developed a set of personas before I had worked with them. And they were trying to figure out what went wrong because they had developed these personas for users of an internal application. So these were fellow employees that they knew who were the end users. And they had created persona descriptions where they named people by name. And there was one particular user that they painted a rather unflattering picture of this person and their persona, and they hadn't intended to share those personas that widely, but somebody saw, quote unquote, their persona and were not happy. It was kind of embarrassing, and they had a lot of egg on their face because they had done that. And you know, what I explained to them is, you know, not only did you create a persona for an N of 1, which is not what you want to do, right? You're not trying to design for a single person. You're trying to design for sort of an amalgamation of a set of people, right? It's characterizing that audience. It's not about that one person. And it's also really smart to avoid names that people would immediately recognize and identify, because there's all kinds of baggage associated with a specific name. So, you know, recently when I was creating personas and sharing them with the stakeholder audience, and they looked at the names of the people and their pictures and their locations, and they said, I don't know who they are. And I said, exactly, because I made them up, right? So it sort of removes some of that baggage of when you know your audience and you know specific people, you want to avoid trying to color it with things that perhaps you're not trying to convey. So those are two key ones, I think, that I look out for now.
Yes, yes. How about you? Why don't you share your take on sort of pitfalls, catch-ups, words of wisdom?
That's to me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so whenever you pitch a persona project, right, you know, you stand up in front of your senior management and you say, we're going to do this persona thing. And one question I always have to answer is, you know, the feeling or the sentiment, like, you know, we already know our customers, right? We've been in this business, you know, longer than you young whippersnappers. So what are we going to learn from this kind of persona kind of effort, you know, that's going to take a long time and give us a piece of paper? And I usually try to answer that in three kinds of ways. First, I sort of ask back, you know, okay, so you know your customers. Do we all agree on what that customer is? You know, if you've got the person from customer service and the person from marketing and the person from IT and maybe the person from sales all in the same room, everyone sees, you know, who the customer is, and, you know, in a slightly different way. You know, everyone's working really hard day in and day out to serve that customer, to do the best they can. But do we all agree about what the biggest problems are? If there's a key insight that one of the teams has, you know, is that insight shared with all the teams, all the cross-functional teams? And I think personas are a great way to drive that out. The second answer to that is, you know, helping them see the difference between maybe job titles and roles that people play. You know, so a person, if you're working on a higher education website, maybe you've got students, you've got teachers, you've got parents. You know, they all these different, you know, sort of titles or jobs that people have. But the roles they might be playing might be common across those. You know, so a role might be a registrant or a donor or something like that. And I think personas are a way to help the teams realize that those segments might be different than the tasks that people are trying to do. Third, I try to tell people that the personas will drive sort of common customer journeys, it will lead very, very clearly into a customer journey map. So once we have a set of personas, we can, okay, now let's talk about, now that we all agree about the kinds of problems and the opportunities that we have for this particular persona, let's map out some scenarios here. What are the different touch points, that this person's going to go through? And it just gives us a shared model for us to sort of synchronize, sales efforts with support efforts, making sure that we're not missing any, there's no information gaps or someone isn't, that we're all consistent as we're interacting with the customer. So I think it really is a really great way to lead into sort of a more general, broad customer experience effort.
Beautiful.
So I have two more questions, actually.
Wait, before we do that, let's give Carol a chance, because I don't think we've had Carol talk about opportunities and pitfalls and needs. Please. Carol?
Yeah, I think in addition to the things that we've already talked about, which are, getting people involved in the project, sort of another way to think about that is that at one company, we developed personas a little bit on the fly. I mean, we had buy-in from the product team, and we had buy-in up to a certain level of executives, but we intentionally decided not to try and make it before we had done the work to try and sell all of the executive team on how important it was, but instead to get buy-in at a certain level and do this sort of on the cheap. And then we kind of presented the personas and said, oh, isn't this awesome? Look at the stuff we've done, and the product team had already started working on them at that time. working with them at that time. So I think, you know, even if there's a perception that maybe not everybody is going to be completely, or it might be a lot of effort, or it might take too many resources to do this in a grand way, coming up with something that's even a little bit smaller. We didn't really explicitly talk about the difference between what I would call corporate-wide personas and project personas, but, you know, I think some of the stuff that Jerry's talked about in terms of lean approaches can be really awesome, especially if you've got just, you know, specific projects and you're not sure that you're going to get full buy-in from everybody. You get buy-in from the people that are working on the project, and you do something to create personas that you can use for that project, and then kind of present them, you know, later and get people excited about it that way. Sort of like create a viral marketing campaign from your personas.
Thank you, Carol. Jennifer.
Sure. So guys, we have about, I just want to do a quick time check here. We have 7 minutes remaining, and we have a handful of questions here. I'm just going to mention what they are, and maybe we can kind of go around and answer some as we see fit. One is on our 4th theme. It's talking a little bit about maintenance. This person asks us a little bit about when we think it's time to renew our personas. This is something that we've discussed internally. I think that's probably worth mentioning. I'm going to throw the others out there now too, though. So others are wondering what projects don't require personas. That's a good question. We have some questions about customer journey mapping, any recommended resources related to journey mapping. So these are a bit tangential to one another. However, I think we can probably tackle a few of those in the remaining time.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is let's kind of compare, before we jump into the maintenance mode, let's just talk about journey mapping a little bit, and Jared can start and share a little bit about the process we do when we, actually even before we start, after we've done a stakeholder mapping and maybe created our initial take on personas, we also like to create, there's a book by Indy Young called Mental Maps. We use that to create an understanding of the different scenarios that each, I guess, persona might play in different needs that they might have from a systems perspective, and then we move into you know, journaling and really understanding what scenarios are in which personas may need to have certain flows. Like to Jerry's point, maybe if it's a college board and you may have a registrant, and that registrant might be a parent or it might be a student, and it could also be depending on, you know, what level you have. So you have certain journeys that have multiple personas to capture it, and so that's our take. Sally, why don't you go ahead and add how you might use scenarios and journaling to add and augment to your personas?
Yeah, I think, you know, a few others have already talked about, you know, I think of personas and scenarios and really how you depict those, whether it's something that is very visual like a journey map, or whether it's something that's much more descriptive like a written scenario. I think of those as a package, right, where neither one can live clearly in isolation, because it's important to know who you're designing for, but it's also important to understand that situational context that you are designing for as well, and what the expectations of that particular end user would be in that scenario. And I think it's important to have something that defines kind of the critical attributes of your design that will determine success or failure from an end user. And so however you do it, whether it's, as I said, visually or more written, it should beg questions of you as the designer as to what's the best way to meet that need. And if it isn't begging those questions, then you probably haven't defined it at a level that's going to help sort of ferret out the details of the design successfully. So I think it's really important to kind of couple those two deliverables together. And what I think is really useful from perhaps a reuse standpoint is, you know, and maybe this kind of goes a little bit to what Carol's talking about in terms of enterprise personas versus project ones. One of the things that I've done is repurpose the same persona in different projects, but I'll create unique scenarios. So, you know, when I've created the persona, it may be about, you know, for example, an employee and what their experience here is like, and I've created that description of that employee, which doesn't change based on what you're designing for them. However, their scenarios are quite unique to the solution that's being designed for them. And so that's one way to not have to kind of redo all the research and all the legwork in creating personas over and over again, but to really think about the scenario as the project-specific entity, but be able to reuse that same set of personas.
Great. Thank you, Sally. So let's go ahead and move on to maintenance. I know we only have a few more minutes. I know this is it's an interesting topic because yesterday when we were meeting as panelists, we were talking about this year really for Keyline, it's been the year of personas. We're getting requests for personas probably every other week from different clients and prospective clients, and we've seen the shift. Carol, earlier you mentioned that Edmunds had them updated 2 years ago. And I understand, you know, Edmunds is a fast-moving company. What do you think are the drivers really that are creating the shift and really the need of personas perhaps being, what is the trigger that actually has companies like Edmunds and other companies you've worked with updating their personas?
Yeah, I think when I first started to learning how to make personas, the advice I was given is that they should be re-examined every 18 to 24 months. And because, you know, we are a very fast-paced company like a lot of others, it's been 2 years we've been using these. They're you know, people are starting to wonder what needs to happen next. And I think it depends on the way the company operates. We've encountered a bit of a shift in our corporate sort of strategic direction, and so this is really what's prompting us to sort of ask ourselves, you know, are these personas still relevant? If they are, I think, you know, what Sally was talking about in terms of different scenarios, but the same personas, maybe that's the direction we're going to go. We're asking ourselves this right now. I think it's, you know, it's not just a matter of time and how old the personas are. It's a matter of what the company is doing, and have there been enough shifts or any shifts that require maybe a little different perspective, and then kind of see, you know, or are you targeting different different market that would require segmentation maybe to be either redone or look at a different segment, and then what does that mean about your personas? Is there a shift required there as well?
Great. Thank you so much. Jerry or Sally, do you have anything that we have about 1 minute, and then we're going to conclude the webinar for today? Maybe one sentence each. What is the drivers of maintenance for personas? That's the question. So
I've never said anything in one sentence. I would say there's some change that would warrant you to re-examine, and I think that can be a business driver, it can be a market change, it could be a technology shift. There's something that makes you question, gee, do I need to re-examine this?
Okay. All right, Jerry?
For me, there are lots of different tools that you can use to make sure that your business and your technology and your people are aligned. Persona is one. It can be done very fast, or it can be done very, very slow. Sometimes it's the right one, sometimes it's not the right one. So if you've got other things that you can do, you know, A/B testing, you know, a quick feature change and see how people react to it, that's also valid. It's however you can learn about your customers and communicate that and get buy-in from everybody, that's the way you got to go.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending today. The webinar will be has been recorded, and we're going to be posting it online in the next 48 to 60 hours. And if you have any questions or other comments, please feel free to send it to rick@keylimeinteractive.com. He's our marketing associate who is handling all the questions, and we'll also post some of these questions and responses if we didn't answer it today. Again, thank you for your time, and this concludes our webinar for today. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, team. Thank you, Coca-Cola. Thank you, Edmunds. Thank you, Integrated DNA Technologies, for your time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.